On September 26, 1855, the first rail link between Sydney to Parramatta was opened in New South Wales. Leading the first train of the Sydney Railway Company was locomotive number 3, the sister engine of number 1, which is now preserved at the Sydney Powerhouse Museum at Ultimo. It's a common misconception that it was number 1 that hauled the first train, but in actuality, number 1 was in need of maintenance that day. But it did haul a special service train from Sydney to Lane Cove Viaduct, which is near the present site of Lewisham on Queen Victoria's birthday. Locomotive number 1 was designed by James McConnell, who was the locomotive superintendent of the London and North Western Railway Southern Division at Wolverton Railway Works, and the Sydney Railway Company's consulting engineer at the time of the railway order. The locomotive was built at Stephenson & Co., who built the rocket, which is now preserved by the London Science Museum at the V&A in London, England, and its replica is at the National Railway Museum in York. Number 1 was shipped to Sydney, Australia by boat in January 1855, along with 3 other of its classmates, and was then used to haul ballast trains during the construction of the first rail link. During its working life, Number 1 was used to carry goods and passengers around Sydney, Campbelltown, Richmond, and Penrith, and as newer locomotives were coming in, it was confined to goods service to Picton and Penrith. It was initially a timber-burning engine, but was then converted to burn coal. It had 2 collisions though. In 1858, 2 people were unfortunately killed after a passenger carriage derailed and toppled down an embankment near Homebush. Then in 1868, a man was killed when Number 1 collided into another locomotive at Newtown Station. In 1877, the locomotive retired after travelling 156,542 miles, that is 251,930 kilometres, and was then preserved at the Powerhouse in 1884 at the Agricultural Hall of the Domain until it was moved in 1893 at a special annex built at the museum's Harris Street site. It was then moved out again in 1905 to celebrate the railway's 50th anniversary. Then in 1917, it was displayed at the New South Wales Government Railway and Tramway Institute Great Industrial and Model Exhibition, Swartz Centenary of European Settlement in 1938, and finally, the centenary of New South Wales Railways in 1955. When the new Powerhouse Museum was built at Ultimo in 1988 as part of a bicentenary project, the locomotive was dismantled and moved to a new site to put on display, and it stayed there ever since. Now 160 years later, New South Wales has about 2,080 kilometres of track, and it passed from the day of steam, diesel, right up until electric trains taking passengers around the intercity, New South Wales and parts of Australia. Here we see the famous Indian Pacific train heading back to Sydney. To mark the 160th, Transport Heritage New South Wales had conducted shuttle journeys between Sydney to Parramatta, where Transport Heritage New South Wales is 3642 and Lachlan Valley Railway 5917, on the day the first rail link was opened 160 years ago. We now move to Sydney Central Station, and we see the Indian Pacific once again ready for its journey to Perth in Western Australia. The first train left Sydney on February 23, 1970, and was controlled by the New South Wales Government Railway on the new Transcontinental Line, being the first train to travel across the Australian continent on standard gauge track. A few months later, 3801, Australia's most famous steam locomotive, became the first steam locomotive to travel on the new line to Perth on the famous Western Endeavour Tour by the New South Wales Rail Transport Museum. As the train is getting ready, we then see 5917 and 3642 pulling into Sydney after their third trip to Parramatta. Earlier on we saw the 2 locomotives travelling tender first through Lidcombe, A problem was caused at Meeks Road that prevented the forward journey going outbound and the return journey tender first. We were now joining the two engines on their final run to Parramatta for the day.
Beautiful for the road. That's a try.
Whoa!
After the locomotive stopped at Penrith, 5917 now leads the train back to Sydney. Meanwhile, the Indian Pacific passes us on its way to Perth. We also see the Paterson Rail Motor Society 600-700 class diesel motors 620-720. So we conclude this October special edition of Rail Around New South Wales. Here's to another 160 years to the railway system of New South Wales.